Hello and welcome to Water Stories, the podcast. I'm Eve Barro, and this podcast is a production of BioBAT Art Space. As we embark on each episode, we invite you to immerse yourself in exciting discussions that illuminate the vitality of water, echoing the themes explored by the artists featured in our Brooklyn exhibition on show until June 2025. Enjoy! Today we are immersing ourselves in the world of Agnes Questionmark, who explores the fluid boundaries of identity and transformation, drawing inspiration from her profound connection to water. Over the years, she has produced numerous works and aquatic performances questioning the self, technology, modern human agency, and hybridity. Agnes Questionmark, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear more about you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
So to start off, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your personal connection to water.
I think the very first memories I have are underwater, because my father literally threw me in the water when I was like 4, 5, 6 years old. My father is a sailor. He traveled the world. He sailed the world. He was he built himself. He was a boat architect, and then he traveled to China to build his own. He designed, and with the help of then a harbor, those people who build the boats, he bought himself a sailing boat, and then he traveled back to Europe with his sailing boat. So I grew up with all his stories, and he showed me his diary of adventures, you know, the onboard diary, which was big, big, big. I went through it, and I was like asking him if he could remember people he mentioned, places he has been. He's been everywhere. And then he lived closer to my birth, me and my brother birth. He lived in Antigua, an island in the Caribbean Sea, where he was earning money by traveling with people, you know, hosting people in his boat. And he just wanted, he didn't want to have his feet on the ground, you know. He just would do anything to live in the boat. So when me and my brother were born in Rome, in Italy, we grew up having this environment around us. So we would always go in the boat. We would live 3 months of the year in an island, sleeping in the boat. So to me, even the noise of water from the boat, you know, that noise was very much present in me, in my perception and how I grew up. It was very important to stress the fact that I grew up with that environment. So for me, it was a way of learning how to use my body, learning how to communicate, learning how to engage with other people in a boat, which it's different because perception changes. You know, you're almost floating. You have to be aware of your weight, of your gravity, of where you put your feet, of where you stand. There is a sense of community as well. You need to communicate. There's the wind, there's the sun, all these elements that somehow shape your daily life. And then, of course, there is the underwater world, which to me was the most exciting. Although my father hoped that I would get interested in sailing boat, which I was not at all. To me, it was just like incomprehensible language. I was interested very much into what was happening under the water, so much that I remember I wanted to be part of it. I really was asking myself why I cannot stay longer under the water. Why can I not be why can't I be one of these creature? And part of me felt I was that creature, no, that underwater creature. And I think then in my adulthood, when I decided to study art, uh, all this imaginary came back, and suddenly I felt the need of expressing it. Also because that's my ultimate goal, you know, like fusing myself with an unhuman, or what we perceive humanity is, or a human relationship is, to avoid, to go away from that sort of human interaction and fuse with unhuman world, and then integrating it into our human society to be able to, you know, approach life in a more fluid and hybrid way, because that's what happens under the water. Somehow you have to find other compromises.
That's really interesting how the first thing that you mentioned was that your first memory was to be under the water. And I know that a lot of your performances involve you being in the water, literally being submerged. And it's interesting because I feel like as humans, or at least maybe not most humans, but a lot of humans are more used to terrestrial environments. And the water is something that sort of inspires a lot of fascination or even maybe fear or oh. And so I'm wondering about maybe on one hand, emotions that you feel when you're underwater, and then on the other hand, almost what it feels like, because you mentioned how growing up around the water also meant that you were aware of certain sounds or the movement of the water or the wind and the other creatures. So yeah, I'm interested in this duality of what it feels like to be underwater.
Yeah, I think the very first thing that struck me by being underwater was the absence of sound, or how sound was muffled and filtered and altered, because what we consider the bass sound, like I don't know how you say in English, like the lower pitch sounds, they travel faster, so you hear those more intensively, much more intensively underwater, whether other kind of sounds cannot be appreciated. And also, of course, the absence of oxygen, which creates a whole set of physical consequences within your body. Your body actually starts to change. The oxygen concentrate and blood concentrate in main organs. That's why you start to feel cold in your hands and your feet, because it's a reaction of our being aquatic, is within our genetics to respond and react to a watery environment. And what fascinates me the most is that whatever you do under the water, you do it with one breath. I always like this idea of like breath to breath. You just take one breath, and with that single breath, you live another experience under the water. It seems like you have to pay a consequence, like it's a little tax you have to pay as a terrestrial creature. You need to take some oxygen and then resist under the water, because yet we can't live under the water. We are not meant to, although there are many theories that proclaim ourselves as the Homo aquaticus. In the future, we can't, unfortunately, live under the water, and we're very clumsy trying to live under the water with all this equipment, technical equipment, that I'm so interested in as well. How we can develop technologically to perform our mundane life under the water. But it does look like a very far away reality. So yeah, it's interesting how we need to find these compromises, what we give away, from what we take and what we need to give away. So it's something that really made me think a lot about how do I have to transform myself in order to be able to survive and live um, under the water. I remember the first time I had the oxygen breather under the water, I felt so weird, almost like I was doing something that I wasn't allowed. I was like, whoa, I'm breathing under the water. This is crazy. It's almost like too much. Why do we? It's like cheating. It's a bit like cheating. In fact, I think fishing under the water with the oxygen breather, it's illegal, because in certain countries you need to be at the same level of the fish. So the fish needs to be able to have something more than the human. The fish needs it's in its own environment so it can breathe. The human has the gun. The human is stronger because it's the gun but cannot breathe. So I think it's an ethical thing, but it means that we do understand speciation. We do understand our roles. Although it's a cruel practice, fishing, I think some other fishing practices are instead very ethical. So so yeah, then that's why I like diving with oxygen breather, but the thing I like the most is free diving, so holding my breath, because there's something so poetic about it. If I think about whales, they live their own life, maybe a whole hour, 2, 3 hours under the water, hunting with just one breath. Um, but then, of course, when I think about oxygen and breathing, I think also about the tragic experience of people who drown under the water. And that's something that I'm also very conscious about when I talk about my relationship with water. I can't help it, as soon as I think about the images of, and especially in Italy, we are a hotspot of nomadic people who from North Africa just try to travel and find liberation in Europe. And that part of the Italian Sea and the very south, it's a place where people drown. And then I was reading this amazing book by Pauline Gams. She's British, I think. And she writes this book called The Undrowned. So the people who survive are the people who were able to survive the drowning. And she draws this beautiful parallelism between humans and mammalians and how much we are connected, not just because we have this romantic experience, the romantic idea of being animals, of being related to this species genetically, but because socially and politically, we do live the same experiences of needing to live under the water, holding our breath. I use plural as part of humanity because we're part of this species, and these human beings, they need to perform as an aquatic mammal to travel the sea and to strive for their survival, to just survive. That's also something I'm aware in my work. When I talk about my work, any kind of field, there is always a political and social debate around it, discourse around it, which it's important to acknowledge.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned this because for a while I was based in Calais, which is the border between France and the UK. And recently, I think in the past 2 weeks, there's 6 people that also lost their lives in the water between France and the UK. I would be curious to hear more about your thoughts on water as this gestational medium for life, but also, as you mentioned, for maybe humans that are not, I don't know if meant is the right word, but who are not adapted to spend so much time in water in these circumstances where it can be a place of death, as you just mentioned. How do you navigate water being a space for life, but then also a space for death and many other things?
There is a theory I read a long time ago that says that we all have an obsession of going back to the womb. And I find this image very, very strong because the womb to me, it means transformation. Of course, it means life, but also means a sort of potentiality, a permanent state of becoming. And that's is what I perform in my underwater works. I perform a permanent state of becoming in which anything is possible in the womb, in a gestation, in a perinatal stage. The fetus has also amazing capabilities, biological capabilities of regenerating itself. I'm just reading this book on surgeries on fetuses, and fetuses can be wounded without creating and forming scars because they have a very fast ability to regenerate cells. So it's been studied also for us human to how to enhance our life. So what I think when I think about fetus and all the experiments that have been done in the fetus inside the womb, it makes me think that we do understand the fetus as another species. We do understand the fetus as something different from us. And so again, we have a political and social implication here, which is the fetus becoming this iconography of the human being, this sort of taboo, sort of icon that also it becomes so delicate, so charged politically and socially, that it does shape our life. It does shape how we should consider ourselves, when and how we address personhood, who is worth of being defined as a human being, when are you considered a person. So again, water leads us to a sociological issue. So yeah, and then culturally, the womb itself creates images of science fiction, to which I'm very interested, because whatever is in a state of becoming, it means that anything could happen, and somehow your mind travels so fast that you can create something that is plausible. It could happen. And the fetus is a sort of monster. It also forms like abnormalities and diseases that are associated with teratology, and teratology is the study of monsters. But we have a wrong association of monsters. We believe everything that is not human, it's a monster. Maybe the alien is a better word, because it doesn't have like negative connotations. A monster usually brings a negative charge with it. And I want to connect it with a queer discourse. Queer people are being considered unhuman. There are always biological and scientific discourses when talking about queerness, when we're going against transgenderness. People who go against this, they always claim science, biology. No, we are biological beings. We have to respect our nature, But what these people don't know is that that same biology, that same nature, it's way more transformative, way more hybrid and fluid than what they think of. So that same discourse that they use as a tool to go against us is actually the tool we have to deploy as artists and as trans people to go against them and to save ourselves. Because biology is not as fixed as we think. The DNA itself is not as fixed as we think it is. It changes, it mutates, and nowadays it's even not so important in scientific experiment as it was before. It was considered to be that blueprint of ourselves that we need to respect, which is actually not nowadays. And with so many medical and scientific practices is being tampered, altered, modified. And this is what I'm interested in. I like to see which one it's a sort of provocation. Where are those practices that are already taking place within human society that entitle me and entitle us to say we're not human anymore? So, for example, just think about fetus surgeries and all the technical apparatuses that are in place to surveil the fetus. It makes the fetus as something completely different, something, and so it's sort of entitled the hybrid technicalization of the fetus itself. So it entitles ourselves to be defined as machines, be defined as hybrid creatures, be defined as duals, are multiple complex beings, when at the same time the politics declares that we need to follow a normative reproduction, we need to follow our biology. For them, biology is normative, is binary, is fixated, Whether I'm here to show you actually, you are doing this, you are doing that, and all these practices go against what you're saying,
I think it's so interesting how you just mentioned science fiction, but then also the fact that it's not so much fiction. It's things that maybe we would consider to be fiction, but actually, if you look at science and the fluidity of actual science, then maybe your explorations are not so much science fictions as they are demonstrations. And you also mentioned several times, I think, this concept of the other, what we consider to be the other, and also maybe who we are, who is included in the we when we say that there's another being that's different. So you mentioned maybe the fetus, you also mentioned queer bodies, and you also mentioned, I think at the beginning of the conversation, whales and your relationship with other creatures that you could encounter in aquatic environments. And I know that because you mentioned it in your work, hybridity is important. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on when sort of symbiosis and cohabitation go through this mutation to become maybe hybridization, because maybe there's so much cohabitation and who decides that, because to cohabit you have to decide that things are different, right? But then what happens when you sort of blur these boundaries and you try to question hybridity and transformation itself?
Hybridity starts again, maybe because I'm reading this book just these days, but hybridity starts from the womb. The mother or the father, whoever biologically hosts the fetus, is indeed a host, and the fetus become a co-host, and there is a symbiotic. There is another word. It's medically it's not called symbiosis. It's called. It has another term because it's actually feeding from. They're feeding from each other, and they're exchanging fluids. They're exchanging diseases. The mother could, let's say, the biological mother can infect the fetus, and vice versa. So it's the basis of our life, to put it generally speaking. And now there has been so many attempts to cross-breed speciations, which I'm very fascinated, to be honest with you, because I think it's an opportunity for us to reflect on who we are, this we that we were talking about before, like who are we? What are we? Are we sure we can be defined with this term of being human? Where does it finish? Where does it begins? I think we are not as fixated as we think we are. So hybridization, it's something that I like to portray in my work and also research, because I do believe we are actually trans species. We transcend our speciation, and we delve into other, and we like sneak into other species constantly, even in our body, and so on and so forth. But there's people who are already like really focused on it, like the cyborgs. There's actually people that consider themselves cyborgs and are also being considered by the state as cyborgs. The most famous is Neil Harbison, who I am actually in touch to make. Another one is Manel de Aguas, who I met in Berlin recently. These are people who live with a technical apparatus in their body constantly. Neil has it fixed in his Manel de Aguas has it removable, but still he does live most of his life with it. So it's interesting how your body needs to adapt physically to this apparatus, and it becomes like a sense, like a constant perception that you feel and you hear. And that's something I would like to develop in relation to whales that you mentioned before, which is an incredible species. I think what strikes me the most about whales is the way they communicate and they pass each other information through ultrasound. And this sound can travel across countries. Whale songs can be so powerful, so strong that they can become hits, like our hit, like the song of the summer. And the strongest sound in a whale community can become a hit for everyone, and they start to repeat it because they know that's gonna be the one. So there is this project called Project SETI, in contrast with Project ETI, which I think is a project from NASA to sort of colonize Mars or something related to Mars. And of course, there's this laboratory who believes that actually, why do we need to colonize Mars when we have a whole ocean which is alien to us to understand? And the alien, the other for them in this case is the whales. They're trying to enter in communication with whales and develop software that would be able to reply to them and try and see what we can gather in this trans-species exchange in terms of communicating. It would be as you would communicate with your dog, with your cat, but not in an affectionate way, in a more professional manner. Perhaps one day we would recognize the state of whales, the society of whales, and we would respect them and even ask them for suggestions on how to better our relationship with nature, our relationship with the sea, they know so many things about the sea that we don't know. But they are also mammals, so they can understand us. They do recognize us. When you jump in the water, whales do recognize you. They know you're not a prey. They recognize boats, they recognize humans. So there is an awareness. And it's fascinating how technology could be for us the medium through which we can communicate with them. And this is so important because the technical device, like a camera, for example, it is that device that allows us to self-identify ourselves. And it is the same tool that we are using to communicate with each other, the same tool that we're communicating with the world. And then to go back to the cyborg, what they're doing is they're embracing this technical apparatus, this technical life a step forward, just like performing it totally and completely. So there are ways to find good compromises with the machine, although it's a very threatening species, if we can call it species or device.
That's so interesting. I was actually going to ask you about whether there was a certain creature that you were particularly fascinated by.
Yeah, I think there is one whale that I really am so fascinated by is the sperm whale. They have a click. They do the click sound, which is also part of a human, a certain way of human, certain parts of human languages. There is an African language, I don't remember which one, that has the click sound. And yet this is the click sound that sperm whales communicate with each other. And they use it as a tool also to kill prey. It's so strong that it can paralyze you. I was looking at a YouTube video of a photographer who got paralyzed in front of a sperm whale. It was so strong, it got for a few seconds paralyzed. That's how they paralyze prey as well, because they need to live in complete dark. And they can build in their brain a map, a geographical map through this ultrasound. When I think about developing my cyborg sense, I think about this sound. I think about the click sound. Blind people, certain blind people, certain levels of blindness, they use the clicks to find themselves, to recognize some objects. Because of course they develop other senses, then they're able to sense more than a non-disabled person. They could sense the vibrations. You could do that if you really, I try to do it. But if you go closer to a wall and start to do whatever kind of click, you will feel the reverberation, the return of the vibration. So this fascinates me so much that I decided to build a new sense with an actual ultrasound device that will send continually ultrasound. And as soon as we'll come back, it will vibrate into my cheekbones. And the cheekbone is so much connected with transitions, with transgender transitioning. At least to me, I was obsessed with those, with having higher and bigger cheekbones to feminize my body. So I want to target that because I really wanted to change those cheekbones. So this device will vibrate into my bones, which is how marine mammals perceive the vibration through bones. And basically what will happen is that I'm going to have a different perception of reality. I could walk around the room with my eyes closed and somehow feel the objects around me. And then to have a generative aspect of the work, I would like to connect this cyborg device to some screens and project with this software and that will translate what I perceive and this vibration into images, so the audience can also see how I perceive or how this device is perceiving reality around through image.
It's really interesting how, like, yeah, this addition of this new sense seems like a new sense, but as you mentioned it, there's already human communities that use it or other species that use it on a daily basis to either analyze their environment or connect to each other. And I would love to also hear more about this idea of connection with these others through these new senses. And I'm wondering if there could be a new sense of kinship or community that goes beyond the human species, because we have new ways or different ways to connect with others that we didn't particularly maybe notice before. Maybe this sort of shifts where the boundary is in terms of who we are.
I think this is a very important question, very, very important question, because, and also I want to clarify that when I talk about using with the technical device and thinking about a future speciation of the human being, even when I talk about the human being, I'm not talking about an enhancement of the human body, because that creates a discrimination. And this is what transhumanist philosopher, transhumanist philosophy, transhumanists itself, because they are a community, they proclaim they want to enhance physically and medically the body to have a better health. But this is a big issue because it talks about accessibility, who is able to access to this human enhancement. And of course it creates discrimination of class, of gender, of ethnicities, of wealth. And for example, these cyborgs that I met, they are not enhancing their body in that sense. They are enhancing their body, but to do something completely irrelevant to your medical state. They're doing it to have an harmonious relation with the world, with the unhuman world, to perceive the atmosphere, to perceive warmth, to perceive colors, to perceive vibrations, to have that sense that other species have in order to understand how they live and understand how they perceive the world. Perhaps we can have a better relationship with them. Immediately, as soon as I got interested, of course, I respect the sea and I love the sea so much. But this respect and this sort of need to establish an harmonious relationship started when I researched on them, when I saw how they live and how they interact to each other. And by performing their way of life, I believe I will open up a new sort of relationship with them. Also to respect them, because who knows, maybe they have no interest in talking to me. They're like, who's this girl in here trying to send me these ultrasounds, I don't even know how they will perceive me, but at least I can bring into our society and make it more fluid, make it more accessible to becoming, I'm so obsessed with the idea of becoming and transforming constantly and adapting to the needs. So yes, I believe in a possibility of establishing new relationship with the non-human species, but also to each other. We need to allow each other to have better relationship, interrelationships, and understand that we are different as well as species. We can't be categorized in just one section. There's so many different ethnicities, so many different populations, and it's about understanding each other, but also allowing each other to be different. That's so important, and that's the same process applies to unhuman species, letting the whales live their life, but yes, understanding and acknowledge their existence and understanding what they need. There is this beautiful piece of writing by Edouard Glissant, Poetics of Space, and he's a writer from the Martinique island, and he was advocating a lot about the discrimination and the racism and how Martinique's people had to suppress their culture because of the dominant French colonization. They just had to forget about their culture. And he writes, Glissant, in response to that, writes this beautiful piece of writing about opacity and how sometimes opacity is very important and not everything needs to be understood and comprehended. Sometimes we need to have a sort of boundary and also not understand misunderstanding, lost also in a different way of approaching things, and that's so important, to have a better cohesion and symbiosis, not using your own words.
I think that's a beautiful closing statement. Maybe I'll just ask one last question, because I really loved how you also introduced this notion of consent, of maybe you want to talk to sperm whales, but maybe they're not going to talk back. And so I'm wondering, maybe as a closing question, what would be the first thing you would tell to sperm whales if you had the opportunity?
It would be so curious to know how do they feel at 1 kilometer under the water with that pressure pressing into their body, hunting for a squid that they will never see, but yet they imagine it into their brain. I would love if they could share an image of how they perceive that environment. That would be amazing. I think camera devices that are being attached to sperm whales are not enough for us to feel how they must feel at that point.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so interesting. I have many more questions, but not more time. So thank you so much for today. Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find all of our other episodes online on our platforms, as well as in our listening room in our exhibition space in Brooklyn, New York. Bye!